Hi, everyone. Welcome to this very special virtual presentation that we are doing today. My name is Maggie Connolly. I am the Planetarium Specialist at Roper Mountain Science Center, and I have a very special guest with me. So today we are going to be talking with Dave Reynolds, who is the Deputy Manager of the Space Launch Systems Boosters. He's going to talk to us a little bit about what that means. He's going to talk to us about the Artemis missions that are coming up in the next few years. As he is talking, I should say. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We will stop periodically to answer as many of your questions as we can. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Dave. Hey, how are you today?
I'm all right. How are you, Maggie?
I'm great, thanks. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just jump right into it then. So this is weird for me. I've done a few non-virtual events. I've gone over. We've got in space camp here. I've gone over and spoke to some of those space campers that are out there, and it's a little weird doing a presentation with the mask and everything. So this is good in some ways without the mask. A little weird that I can't see my audience out there. So I'm looking forward to fielding some of your questions and sharing some of the things that we've got that are exciting going on. In fact, I think the reason that Roper Mountain asked me to come speak is because we've got a really exciting event next week in the booster project that y'all can watch on NASA TV. On Wednesday of next week. So let me get into that. Let me share my screen and make sure that you can see what I can see. There we go. Can you see my screen, Maggie?
We sure can.
Okay, perfect. So let me go into presenter view here. All right. Does that look better?
That looks great.
Okay. All right. So I work, my name's Dave Reynolds, like she said. I work in the Space Launch System program. That's NASA's flagship that is trying to get us back to the moon and beyond. I work as the deputy manager for the SLS booster office. The boosters, as you may be familiar with, are the big white things on the side of the SLS. If you're familiar with the shuttle, then you know what the boosters are. Those are the two big white boosters that were sitting on either side of the external tank. You would launch and you would go about 2 minutes with those boosters, and then they would drop off. They had parachutes in them. They'd pick them up in the ocean, haul them back, clean them out, and put more propellant in them, and they'd be ready for another space shuttle launch. We have taken those boosters and have upgraded them for the SLS program to give us more power, more thrust, more performance for that vehicle, because we don't just want to go to the moon this time. We want to go and stay on the moon. We want to actually build a base. We want to have people living there, and we want to have it as a staging ground to teach us how to live on other planets so that one day we can go to Mars. The program that we work on right now is called the Artemis program. So Artemis, you're familiar with the Apollo program back in the 60s. That was the Neil Armstrong and the Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon. Well, Artemis in Greek mythology is Apollo's twin sister. And so we thought that was kind of a fitting name for what we're trying to do. And we chose her as the name of the program because we believe that she personifies our path to the moon, because she is the goddess of the hunt, and she is I think she kind of personifies it because not only we've had 12 folks actually land on the moon and walk around, but we've never had any women. And so that, I think, pays homage, the fact that it's that Apollo's twin sister is the name of our program. That pays homage because that is one of the primary goals, is to make sure that we have a broad, diverse group that will be going to the moon to represent all mankind. All right, I'm going to play a video. Hopefully it plays smooth enough. And this will show you the place that we are trying to land on the moon. And you, Maggie, let me know if this isn't working out, but I'll get it going here.
Okay.
You should see something moving now.
Mm-hmm. No, that looks great.
So this is a video rendering of the South Pole region of the moon. that is the place that we are targeting to land. And you can see in this video why we want to land there. It's because you can see that there's never any darkness on the south pole of the moon. There are places on the south pole that have full daylight at all times. It's never sitting in shadow. And so as humans landing on the moon, obviously we need power of some sort, and we are given that ability to generate that power through solar power as we sit on the south pole of the moon. Not only that, but the south pole of the moon will also have a direct line of communication with the Earth at all times as well. So it doesn't matter where on the Earth we are, we will be able to communicate if we are sitting on the south pole. So that is one place that humans have not landed, and it is the primary target of where we think that we want to go. It gives us a lot of opportunities to explore. We also don't know a lot about the poles of the moon. There's a possibility that the south pole of the moon could, I'm going to play the video again so you can see the sun rotating around and see that we have solar power at all times. We believe that there is a possibility that there is water on the moon at the polar regions. And if the polar regions do have water, that means that we also have a means of generating propellant, which means that you can haul even more material to the moon and be able to launch and return back to the Earth without having to bring your propellant to return back to the Earth with you. But it takes a lot of work to get to the moon. So what you've probably been familiar with, if you have followed the space program for the last, probably 40 years now, probably 45 years, we have done what we call LEO, low Earth orbit. And in LEO, that is basically where all of your satellites are. Your space station is there, and that is where the shuttle went. The shuttle was not capable of going any further than that. So that was at 250 miles in altitude, so really not that high up. And then when you wanted to return, it was actually fairly, as far as the complexity of missions go, it was actually pretty easy to get back from low Earth orbit. It took you about 3 hours if you decided you wanted to come home. Your spacecraft, because of the speed that you were traveling, we travel in low Earth orbit at 17,500 miles an hour. Your spacecraft would heat up to about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit because you have to bleed off all that energy of traveling so fast. And it would heat up to about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a manageable, believe it or not, even though that seems crazy hot, that's a manageable temperature for us. So that being said, you want to go to the moon. That's a little trickier. You decide that you want to come home from the moon. It's going to take you 3 days because you're traveling at 25,000 miles an hour, but the moon is about 250,000 miles away. Because you're traveling faster, when you hit the atmosphere, you're going to be going so much faster that you're going to heat your spacecraft up to about 5,200 degrees. All right, so that's the moon. But if you live on Mars, it's going to take you about 9 months to decide to come home, because you'll be traveling at 26,800 miles an hour and you're 39 million miles away. Your spacecraft could heat up to 6,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see why the moon is a staging ground for us to learn how to go to Mars. We went to the moon a few times, but we didn't really learn how to live there. You can see, though, that if we go to Mars, we have to learn how to live there. We also have to learn how to get back from there. So that's the tricky part. That is what the Artemis program is for. It is to teach us, just like the space station taught us how to live in space for extended periods of times. The Artemis program is to teach us how to live on the moon so that we can one day live on Mars. So that's probably a good breaking point for questions, Maggie.
I don't think that we have any questions just yet, although I have a question. So when the astronauts head to the moon for Artemis, do we know how long they're going to stay? Did you say that?
I don't believe I did say that, but there's different durations of missions.
Okay.
So when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin went, they actually only spent a collective few hours on the moon. I think it was around 6 hours that they spent total. And later on in the missions towards Apollo 17, which was our last mission, we were spending 2 to 3 days on the moon. We obviously want to do much better than that. The first Artemis manned mission, which is going to be the second Artemis mission, is not landing on the moon because we don't have a lander built yet. They're going to do more like an Apollo 8 type mission that goes and circles around the moon and spends some time in orbit. And they want to spend, I think it's at least a week on the moon for the Artemis 1 or for the Artemis 2 mission. Once they get on the moon, once we have landers, the goal is to spend several weeks on the moon. So you're talking 20, 30 days on the moon. So it's quite a bit different than the Apollo program. That gives these guys an opportunity to not just bring all their food and air, but also figure out how they're going to recycle some of that air, recycle some of their water so they don't have to haul it all. It's really a learning program more than anything else, compared to an exploration mission of what the Apollo program was.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you were talking, we did have a question from Becky come in. She wants to know, how much will the Artemis program cost?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I don't know if I'm fully qualified to answer that question.
Sure.
Yeah, so the Artemis program is an evolution of the shuttle program. We started out after shuttle came to a stop in 2011. We were working on what was called the Constellation program, and it was somewhat similar architecture in some ways to the Space Launch System, and so a lot of those components. The Constellation program was canceled by Congress, and it was replaced by the Space Launch System, and with that change, there were a lot of things that shuffled around in the architecture of the rocket and some of the missions that they were trying to do. And so with that changeover, that's why I'm saying it's hard. It's kind of hard for me to give you an exact number because we've made so many different evolutions over time. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's not a cheap program. It is not cheap to go to. It's not cheap to go to the moon, right? And so, a lot of the times. SLS is compared to the SpaceX launches, and really you're looking at completely different missions. In fact, let me jump to my next slide, and that's a good segue there. The Space Launch System is a completely different architecture. That previous slide that told you about low Earth orbit, the moon, and Mars, that basically tells you that the architecture of your rocket, the way that you build your rocket and fly your rocket, all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. SpaceX has done some fabulous, fantastic things. And if you've never seen a SpaceX launch, you've got to see one because they are absolutely amazing to watch those rockets lift off. And then if you catch one of the SpaceX heavy launches where they have the two booster, what are they called? Falcon 9s on either side, and they come down and they land on the coast of Florida, and they land synchronously at the same exact time. And then there's another one that lands on the barge. That is a fantastic vehicle. But the Falcon 9 is designed to bring things to low Earth orbit. They've got some architectures that might be able to bring them to the moon someday, but right now it just doesn't exist. And that's really what SLS was designed for. So it is not a cheap program, but we believe that, just like the Apollo turned around and gave us tremendous payback to our daily activities. I mean, just the fact that we are talking on over Skype right now is a testament back to the Apollo programs, because the microprocessor was one of the things that was partially derived and developed because of the Apollo program. So we believe that Artemis is going to give us the same type of payback in learning how to live and work in space and live and work on the moon. It teaches us so many different things that have application back here on the Earth. So that was not a straightforward answer, and I apologize for that. But the fact is, there just really isn't a straightforward answer to how much Artemis would cost.
Absolutely, and that makes total sense. I mean, honestly. So we have two quick questions about space food. So Hayden, who is 5, wants to know if people can eat their food outside of the rocket ship.
Ooh. All right, so Hayden, so we want to take a picnic outside the rocket. So the tricky thing, and as you probably know, Hayden, the tricky thing about space is there is no air, right? There is no atmosphere whatsoever. So the only way to leave your spacecraft is wearing a spacesuit. An environmental suit is what they call it. So you've seen the pictures of the astronauts. Anytime you see a picture of the astronaut hopping around on the moon or doing a spacewalk on the space station, they're wearing those big white suits that have the big bubble helmet. So because they can't, I mean, imagine picking up an apple and trying to bring it to your face, you're going to hit that bubble, right? So you really can't eat so much while you're doing those spacewalks. Anytime the astronauts eat, they're sitting inside of their spacecraft. However, inside of those environmental suits, there is a little straw that kind of pokes up, because you got to imagine those guys, they're doing some pretty tough, hard work when they're doing those spacewalks. They're moving stuff around, they're twisting bolts, they're pulling things out, pulling electronic cards out and putting new ones in. They're going to get thirsty. And so they actually can lean their head over and suck on the straw. They can get some water. And I believe a lot of the time they also have some, it's almost like Gatorade off to the side as well to replace some of their electrolytes. So no, not when you're outside the spacecraft do you get to eat your lunch. But once you come back in, I'm sure that they get to sit down for a snack.
Fantastic. All right, one more space food question. 5-year-old Jacoby wants to know if you have a favorite space food.
I do, actually. So like I said, I went to space camp twice when I was a kid, and I got addicted to the astronaut ice cream. So if you ever go to a planetarium or Roper Mountain, I bet they even sell it. I don't know, but they might sell it. They have these little packets of astronaut freeze-dried ice cream. You say, freeze-dried, what is that? Well, freeze-dried is where they take the food, the regular food that you're used to eating, and they take all the moisture out of it. So all the water out of it. So imagine ice cream without any water on it. It's almost like a cracker almost, right? And why in the world would we want to do that? Well, the biggest reason is water is heavy, and it's hard to carry up. And you imagine that, so you see my rocket here on the screen. Every pound that we put on that rocket, we have to lift up into space. And if we bring a pound of water that is in food, that is food, or that is a pound of that we have to take out from somewhere else. We have to have an astronaut that's a little lighter, or maybe a science payload that we can't bring because we're bringing water. So a lot of the food, they try to remove most of the moisture from it. And one of those things, it's a treat that they have, is ice cream. And actually, you put the ice cream in your mouth, and the spit in your mouth mixes with the ice cream. It actually tastes a lot like ice cream, and really good stuff. And so if you ever have an opportunity to try that stuff, I recommend it.
I also like the astronaut space ice cream, so that was a good choice. All right, well, I'm going to let you continue. Folks who are watching, again, if you have questions throughout, please go ahead and just put them in the chat, and we will get to them at our next question and answer break.
All right, Maggie, let me double check. We have 40 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds about right. So we're kind of flexible, so it really is however long you want to chat with us.
Okay. All right, so this is my rocket. This is the Space Launch System. This is the one that we're building, and this is a rendering of it, a computer rendering of it. But we actually have real hardware that we are putting together down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida and Stennis Space Center in Mississippi right now. So you see the two big boosters on either side. That is what I work on. I'll talk about those in a minute. But the vehicle is really made up of 4 big main parts. You've got, and I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse?
No, we cannot.
All right, so you've got the 2 big pointy boosters that are on either side, and then you've got the big orange tank in the middle. So the 2 big boosters on either side are what we call solid rocket boosters. And what that means is that the propellant is solid. If you were to touch the propellant that is inside those boosters, it's almost like touching an eraser on a pencil. That's about how squishy it feels. They're very stable. You can store them for a long time. And when you light them, they put off a lot of thrust. They put out a lot of power on the backside. But the one downside to solid rocket boosters is that you turn them on and you cannot turn them off. I mean, there is no way once we light those boosters that you are going to fly once you light your boosters. The other part of the vehicle is this core stage, what we call the core stage. This orange part is the fuel tank. You've got hydrogen and oxygen, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen inside of that tank. And that means that they're cryogenic, which means it's super cold. The hydrogen is cooled down to about minus 430 degrees Fahrenheit, and the oxygen is cooled down to about minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason we cool it is because when you cool something, it gets very dense and it becomes liquid. If we did it in gas form, then it would want to expand and you'd have to have a really, really heavy, strong tank to be able to store it. But once you condense it and you get it really cold, then it stays in liquid form. And then you don't have to have as thick a tank, so it's lighter. So we don't have to carry as much what we call inert mass. We don't have to carry as much of the rocket. We can carry more of the propellant, and the propellant is really what we need to be able to make it into space and into orbit. So those are the fuel tanks. Those feed the engines down at the bottom. You can see there's 4 of them. Those are the same engines that were on the backside of the space shuttle. They're called RS-25s. They used to be called the Space Shuttle Main Engine. And they are liquid engines. So they use up those liquid oxygen and hydrogen. You mix those together inside and you produce some sort of spark, and it is going to light up and produce a lot of what we call impulse. So the difference between a liquid engine and a solid motor is really what you're trying to accomplish. And the reason that we have both on this is because we're trying to accomplish 2 things. The first thing we're trying to accomplish is to get out of Earth's gravity. The second thing we're trying to do is build up enough speed to be able to get into orbit. So in order to beat gravity, you have to put out a lot of thrust. And that is what solids excel at. They are great at it. They put out, imagine that's like a diesel locomotive, right? They put out a lot of thrust, but frankly, they don't get very good gas mileage. And so we get out of the thickest part of the atmosphere and the highest amount of gravity using those solids, and then they drop off because once they're empty, we don't want to carry the shells anymore. And so for the rest of the way up into orbit, we use those RS-25 liquid engines on the bottom. Each one of those puts out about 500,000 pounds of thrust each, so about 2 million pounds total. And that they don't put out as much thrust, but they get a lot of impulse. And if you think of a car, they are like a Prius, right? A Toyota Prius. They get really good gas mileage, but they don't have a lot of power. You're certainly not going to tow a boat with a Toyota Prius, right? So that is why we have both of them on there, because we not only want to tow a boat, but we want to go a long ways with it. So we have our solids to get us out of the atmosphere and then and past gravity, and then we have our liquids to get us into orbit. And all of that is to carry that little white pointy thing at the very top, that big white section there. That is where the crew sit. That is where we carry all of our payloads. And that is really what we're trying to get into orbit. So everything else that is from orange and down drops off once you get up into the sky. And the rest of the mission is all performed by that little bitty white bit at the very top. So that is the architecture of the Space Launch System. If you want to see how it compares to get some things that you might be familiar with, so you got the Statue of Liberty there on the left. You can see a little tiny person, the little white dot there you can see is a representative of a person and a giraffe. Then you got the space shuttle. So you've probably seen videos of the space shuttle launching. Next to it is what we're calling the SLS and Orion Block 1. The SLS is the rocket, and the Orion is the crew capsule at the top. So the Block 1 is 322 feet, so it's a little taller than the Statue of Liberty. Then we're going to be moving to the SLS Orion Block 2, which is going to be able to carry even more payload, and that is slightly taller than the Saturn V. Far more powerful. Even the Block 1 is more powerful than the Saturn V is, but the Block 2 is way more powerful than the Saturn V was, and the Saturn V was the rocket that brought us to the moon the first time. So we're going to be able to carry a lot more payload using the architecture of the SLS. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my favorite thing here. So these are the solid rocket boosters. These are the actual parts that you can see in this picture that are going to be flying on Artemis 1. There's a couple of guys inspecting one of the boosters just before we ship it out to Kennedy Space Center. Then they haul it by truck, and then they put it on a train. These are built in Utah and tested in Utah, and the segments are shipped off to Florida and assembled, and that is where the rest, you can see the little gray picture there on the left. That's where the rest of the vehicle is hung, is off of those two boosters. So the thing that we've got going on next week is a test to demonstrate a new propellant. We have a new aluminum, which is one of our main fuels inside of our solid propellant. We've got a new aluminum vendor that we are trying to check out to make sure that once we change out the aluminum, that it'll still give us the performance on that booster that we need. All right, so let me show you a quick video here. You can see the different parts there. Those are your two solid rocket boosters. This is the one of the solid rocket boosters being hauled over in the vehicle assembly building in Florida. You can see how big they are. They stand about each segment. We're calling this a 5-segment solid rocket booster because back in the shuttle days there were 4 segments, and we added a 5th to give us more thrust. And each segment is about 25 feet tall, so the total booster is about 150 feet. This is the test that we're going to be doing next week. They set it on its side, they blast it, and we check the thrust. We check to make sure that the nozzle can gimbal around, and do a lot of other instrumentation to be able to figure out what we can learn from it, so that once we have the boosters on the side of the actual rocket, we know what they're going to do. So what we're calling the test this next week is FSB1. That's Flight Support Booster number 1. We are trying to check the performance of it. We are checking to make sure that our contractor, which is Northrop Grumman, is still building them according to the specifications that we have asked for. And we have some, like I said, some new ingredients in there that we're going to be doing. And because you can't test a solid and then reuse it on a SLS mission, because you have to put more propellant in it, we have to test the process. We have to show that once they build one, that they can build more of them without changing anything. Let's see. Yeah, that's probably a good spot to stop for questions if there are any more.
Sure. I have a question. I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly, so you can tell me if I'm wrong. So the reason that NASA is developing these boosters is so that they can have a spaceship that can take more stuff with it, right? Like materials and supplies. That way people can stay maybe on the moon or on Mars for longer. Is that right? Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, so Elizabeth, who's 9, wants to know what it would feel like to fly in the rocket.
I've never flown in the rocket, but I know several folks that have, right? So you want to be an astronaut and you want to fly on these rockets. It's kind of interesting because every rocket is a little bit different, right? So I'll give you 3 examples. So I know that the 2 astronauts that just launched on the SpaceX rocket, tremendous success. They brought them up on a SpaceX rocket to the space shuttle, or to the space station, and landed again. They said that the ride was pretty smooth. It kind of jostled them around a little bit. So it was kind of like, they said, riding down a bumpy road a little bit. The astronauts that I've talked to that have flown on the space shuttle, they had 2 very different experiences. So for the first 2 minutes, because of the solid rocket boosters that were on the side, they said it was like being sitting on top of a washing machine that has a brick in it. So it shakes you all over the place for about 2 minutes. But as soon as those boosters drop off and you're just running with your liquid engines on the backside of the shuttle, then they said it's very, very smooth. It's almost like you're not even on sitting on top of a rocket. But what they do say that you can feel is G loads, what we call gravitational loads. It's pushing you into your seat. So if you've ever flown on an airplane, that first few seconds when you're running down the runway and you get pushed back into your seat, that is what is G loading. You are accelerating and your body is catching up to the airplane. So it's actually pushing back into that seat, and the airplane seat is pushing you forward. Well, think about accelerating like astronauts do from 0 miles an hour to 17,500 miles an hour in over the period of 8 minutes. So that is what it feels like for them. They're just continually being pushed into their seat. And then when it shuts down, they are absolutely weightless, which is the magical part, right? Because they're in orbit. And at that point, they're in microgravity. They can't feel anything pushing them. They can't feel the floor pushing them. They push off the floor. You've seen them floating around in there. So they have nothing pushing on there, and they're just able to float around. So that's a second example. The third example is we used to fly astronauts, and we probably still will for a little while, on Russian Soyuz rockets. And because those use a different type of propellant, different type of engine, those are pretty rocky as well. So they get shook around, and it's a pretty exciting ride. But they're still going to feel that same thing. They're going to feel that loading that pushes them back into their seat for about 8 minutes until it lets off, and then they are going to feel absolutely nothing. They're going to have no forces acting on them whatsoever. It's almost, from what I've heard, it's like floating in the middle in a pool. Where you're completely neutrally buoyant, where you're just floating there with no forces pulling you down or pushing you up or anything. That's what I've heard.
Wow, that would be an interesting feeling. Right, another question about the rocket. This is from Jacoby, who's 5. He wants to know how the rocket blasts fire.
Okay. Actually, that is a great segue too. Let me jump to my next slide, and I think I can answer that. So you see on this slide that it says solid rocket boosters are the largest, most powerful boosters ever built for flight. Each booster burns 6 tons of propellant every second and generates a max thrust of 3.6 million pounds. So what that really means is that if I had a single solid rocket booster and I put 3.6 million pounds on top of it, it would stay in one spot. If I had less than 3.6 million pounds, let's say I put 3 million pounds, it would lift off the ground a little bit. Probably not far, but it would lift off the ground a little bit. So the question is, how does it blast fire? So the propellant is what we call energetic. Inside the propellant, you've got little tiny molecules. Everything in the universe is built up of atoms and molecules. And inside of these boosters, we have molecules that are tied together. And when you tie a molecule, these are tiny, tiny. You can never see them with your eyes. You can barely even see them with even the most powerful microscope in the world. But they are tied together using what's called a chemical bond. And that bond is a bunch of stored up energy. And those molecules, they can store that energy pretty well, but what they really want to do is they want to break apart. And so if you give them even a little bit of energy to break apart, once they snap apart, they release all that energy. Well, all that energy turns into something that we are very familiar with, and that is heat. And heat is what we see as fire, right? So when you see a booster or a rocket with flame shooting out the back of it, what you're seeing is a breaking of chemical bonds, so that all these molecules are releasing all this energy, and they're doing it at 6 tons of molecules per second in the booster. And in a rocket, you really only give it one place to go. All that energy, all that pressure that's building up inside the rocket, I want you to imagine yourself inside of an elevator with 30 of your friends, and I turn the air conditioner off. and the elevator doors are closed, you're going to get pretty squirmy. You're not going to want to be in there anymore. And the second I crack that door open, I guarantee I'm going to have a dozen 9-year-olds pushing and shoving to get out of there because they don't want to be in there anymore, right? And so that is exactly what we do with a rocket. We build up all this power, all this energy, all this pressure inside the rocket. But guess what? It's only got one place to go, out the back end. You can see on this picture, the two little square pictures that are inside the bigger picture. That is what's called the nozzle. That is where we let all that flame and smoke go. And as that flame goes through that nozzle, it speeds up because it's like all these 9-year-olds pushing to get out of this elevator, and they want to go running out and get some fresh air as fast as they can. Well, that's the same thing with the flame. It wants to push out through that nozzle. Well, Sir Isaac Newton, who was a physicist about 500, 400 years ago, came up with this theory that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And that is exactly the way that we make a rocket work. Because as all the molecules that have now burst apart and are high energy and flame want to go shooting out the backside of that nozzle, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, which means that the booster and the rocket wants to go the other direction. You've done this before, I can almost guarantee it. If you've ever taken a balloon and you have blown it up and then let it go and let it shoot around the room, then you have built yourself a little mini rocket, right? Because when you blow up a balloon, you're doing the same thing. You're storing a bunch of energy in there. You've got a bunch of air in there that is being pushed in by the balloon. The balloon wants to be small, so it's pushing down on that air. And when you let go of it, you're only giving that air one direction to go, which is through that little hole. And so it is pushing out the back end, and for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, which is going to push the balloon the other direction. That's exactly the way the rocket works.
That is super cool. Thank you. We have one last question, and then I'll let you continue. This isn't rocket related, but it is space related. So Elizabeth, who is 9, wants to know if astronauts bring moon rocks back for their families.
So I know that, we haven't been to the moon since 1972. So nobody has actually brought any moon rocks back since then. And it's kind of interesting that you ask it the way that you did, whether or not they bring it back for their families. You know, we think of these astronauts going to the moon as individuals, but really they worked for the government, and the government works for you, right? So really these astronauts are working for you. They are going up there to learn all these things and study all these things and pick up moon rocks for you. So when the astronauts would go up onto the moon back in the 60s and 70s and pick up moon rocks, they were really picking them up for the American people. And so the answer is really no. They didn't bring them home for their families because they didn't belong to the astronauts. The rocks that they picked up didn't belong to the astronauts. They brought them back, and they are collectively owned by the people of the United States. And so that's why you can go to a lot of different museums around the country, and they have moon rocks because the government who owns the moon rocks has given these moon rocks to these museums because they want everybody to experience it. So I know that some of the astronauts, some of the Apollo astronauts have moon rocks, but that's because the government has basically loaned them moon rocks as sort of a thanks for risking their life to be able to go to the moon.
Nice little consolation prize, I suppose. All right, I see one more question from Jacoby. Jacoby, we are going to get to that in just a minute. We are going to let Dave continue, and then on our next break, we'll get to your question, buddy.
All right, so next week, next Wednesday, and it's at 1:05. It's when it's planned for, is 1:05 p.m. Mountain Time. So I guess in Roper Mountain that would be what, 3:05 p.m.
Yep.
And we're going to be doing our solid rocket booster test, and you can watch it on NASA TV. So if you go to the NASA webpage, there's a NASA TV link. You can watch it on there. They're going to stream it live, and you'll be able to watch this test. It'll be about 2 minutes long, and you'll be able to see one of our 5-segment solid rocket boosters fire. And I've got a video from our last test. Let's see if this one works. And I think this is in slow motion. It's kind of cool to see how it how it starts up. So it sits there pretty dormant, looks like nothing is happening, and then you'll see this puff of smoke come out. That's the ignition. That is when those molecules are just barely starting to break apart, and then it picks up power pretty quickly. Let's see if you can see this. All right, so all that stuff that's coming out is a plug that we stick in the nozzle. It keeps the bugs from getting out, also helps build up the pressure. So there's your first flame shooting out there. Is that streaming okay, Maggie?
Yes, that looks super cool.
Yeah, so you see that little sign that's there kind of off to the right? It's kind of interesting. That's a mirror, and it actually gets destroyed every single time we test because we actually set a mirror there so we can see up inside during ignition, because it'd be kind of rough on a camera, as you can imagine, to stick a camera right up there on the end. But by having a mirror there, we can watch the ignition and see exactly what's going on. So like I said, we lay one of these 5-segment solid rocket boosters on its side, and we go ahead and fire off the igniter. It's almost like a small rocket engine that lights up the rest of the propellant. This is the mirror view, by the way. So that is the plug, that red dot there. You're going to see it break apart. Boom. And then the flame shoots down the bore of the solid rocket booster. You're looking right up. This is almost as if you had your head in the nozzle, which would be a bad idea, by the way. And the flame shoots out, and you get 3.6 million pounds of thrust for 2 minutes. If you ever are in the area in Utah, when they test one of these things, they have a public viewing area that you can pull off the side of the road and watch it. And you're about a mile away when they're testing this. And it feels like somebody is pounding you in the chest once that sound hits. And it's really interesting because you get to experience a lot of different things. The first thing you see it, right? And light travels a lot faster than sound. So you actually see it about 5 seconds before you actually hear it. You actually you see it about 5 seconds before you hear it, and then once you hear it, it's so low and rumbly, and it feels like somebody's pounding you in the chest. So this is just one booster. Imagine going to an SLS launch. You're going to have 2 of these boosters plus 4 RS-25. So like I said, 3.6 million pounds of thrust per booster. That gives you 7.2 million pounds of thrust just from the boosters, and then 500,000 pounds per RS-25. That's another 2 million. So in total, 9.2 million pounds of thrust all at once. That is going to be the most powerful rocket that mankind has ever lit off. It's going to be a pretty amazing show. And so this is next Wednesday. So if you go to the NASA TV website at 105 Mountain, so 3:05 Eastern time, go a little bit early because we're usually pretty on time with these things. Then you can watch the coverage of it and you can watch the test. All right. All right, so I spent all my time on the boosters. That's just because that's the part that I work on. That's the part that I know about. But like I said, there's a lot of other parts on the SLS. You can see there the core stage and the 4 RS-25 engines. That is actually down in Mississippi right now. They are getting ready to test that in the next couple of months. They're going to test the first stage, and they're going to let it run for a few minutes, and then they're going to put it on a barge. They're going to haul it to Kennedy Space Center, and we're going to build up that rocket ready for a launch next year. This just shows you the RS-25s. So we saved about 14 of these from the shuttle program, so that's what we're flying out. But they're starting to build new ones, and they're doing it with some upgrades. This is a video of the test down at Mississippi. They test each one of these to make sure. And like I said, this is the difference between a liquid and a solid, is that you can test a liquid beforehand and you can't test a solid, but they don't put out as much thrust. So it's, give and take on a lot of different things. All that white smoke that's coming out, part of it is rocket exhaust, but the rest of it is cooling water. We dump water underneath the rocket so it doesn't melt the test stand. There's the core stage. You can see how big it is compared to how big those people are. There it is being hauled into the stand down in Mississippi. That thing down at the bottom is the Pegasus barge. That is what we use to bring it to Kennedy Space Center. We haul it by water, and they put it up, haul it all the way around the coast of Florida and pick it up at Kennedy and put it together. There's a video of it, of them picking up the core stage and putting it into the stand. I mean, this is an exciting time for us. I mean, it has been almost 10 years since we have launched an exploration vehicle developed by NASA. We've launched the SpaceX vehicles. Those have basically taken the place of what the shuttle used to do. And now this is, for the first time in really 50 years almost, we are developing an exploration vehicle. That is what SLS is designed for, is to explore space. The space shuttle was designed to learn about low Earth orbit, but not to explore space. That's why we're really excited. That's why NASA's all buzzing about the SLS rocket, because this is something that we haven't done in most of our lifetimes. So they will be green running that in the next couple of months. I'm sure you'll be able to watch that on NASA TV as well. Then we've got the different adapters that attach the rest of the SLS rocket to the Orion, which is the crew vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead and talk about the Artemis 1 mission. All right. The Artemis 1 mission is our test flight. This is what we're going to launch next year. And it is going to be a circumlunar test where we send a crew vehicle without crew on it up and around the moon, orbit the moon all automatically, and bring it back. So it's a full-up test of the entire system. Let's see. All right, so this will give you the general idea of what it is that we will be doing with the Artemis 1 launch next year. So we roll it out onto the Pad 39B, which is the same launch pad that one of the shuttles used. About 3 miles away, you've got your Launch Control Center. They clear out the area. The only people that would ever be allowed after they have fueled up the tanks are the crew of the SLS. But like I said, this first flight will be non-crewed because we want to make sure it's safe. We launch, we orbit the moon. They'll do a series of different of orbit maneuvers to demonstrate what they can do. Fire off the engines, followed by, once the engines come up to full power, fire off the boosters. And there we go. So we lift off with about 9 million pounds of thrust. And then you're going to see here these those two boosters drop off. There they go. So the boosters drop off into the ocean. Core continues to go. And then eventually the core runs out of fuel and it's dropped off. And then we are in low Earth orbit. But that's not where we want to go. We want to go to the moon. So we detach from the core, fire off what we call the ICPS. That's the interim cryogenic stage propulsion. And we fire and head towards the moon. That is the translunar injection burn. It sends us careening away from the Earth and towards the moon. We drop off the ICPS because we don't need it anymore. Why carry all the weight? And then we turn everything off and we just coast, because once you're going, great thing about space is once you're going, you don't need to push anymore. So we just coast for a few days, 3 days, like I said, and head to the moon. So once that mission is successful, we're going to do the Artemis 2 mission. And the Artemis 2 mission is our first crewed mission. They will select the crew and excuse me. They will select the crew and announce them next year, but the Orion holds 4 astronauts. You can see the commander and the pilot that would be sitting up at the control panel, and then you've got 2 other crew members at the bottom. And then beyond that, we have Artemis 3, Artemis 4, and so on, and that is when we are trying to actually land on the moon. We're trying to do a bunch of experiments on the moon, figure out how people can live there, see what the poles are like. And one other thing that we are going to try to develop is what we call the Gateway, which is essentially a space station that is orbiting the moon, but it gives us an opportunity to build up architecture for transition to be able to fly to Mars. So it would allow astronauts to come and dock at the Gateway. The Gateway would have a Mars departure vehicle attached to it. It would have fueling modules that come and fuel that vehicle. And that way, the astronauts, once they're ready to go to Mars, they can just dock with the Gateway and make their way there. And that, of course, is our long-term goal, Mars. If you've seen The Martian, they actually hit it pretty well. We kind of want to build a habitat there. We want to explore and be able to basically learn how people can live on other planets. Because that is what we do. That is what humans have always done. We have started in one place, we go to another place, we learn about that place, we go to another place, we learn about that place. And now we want to go off the planet and learn about Mars. That's our next neighbor. It's probably the most hospitable for people to live on permanently. And we want to find out what we can find out. All right. So my next couple of slides, real quick, are different jobs. So if you're excited, if this stuff, and if you're watching this, you probably are kind of excited about it. We have a lot of different things that people do. And I bet you if you think of something that you like to do, we probably have at NASA a job that does something like that. We hire interns, which are high school kids and college kids, to come and learn about the different pieces of it. We've got flight controllers. Those are the guys in Houston or in Florida that control the launch and the flight. We've got avionics technicians that are folks that build the computers that tell the rocket how to fly. We've got welding technicians. Because we use some really high-tech materials, we have to have special welders and specially trained people. We've got, if you like to go snorkeling or scuba diving, we've got people that train, excuse me, we've got people that train the astronauts how to do that. We train them to get in and out of the capsule when they land in the ocean. And we train them how to do their mission underwater, because that's the closest thing we can do to living in space here on the Earth. We have basically construction workers that build the launch pads for us. We have people that work social media. So if you're interested in public relations and getting to know, doing news events and things like that, we have people, that's the people that arranged for me to come talk to you guys today. That's our social media folks. We need geologists. We have people, you like to design clothes. Well, we've got some pretty nifty clothes that we design with spacesuit designers, right? You got to keep people alive when they go exit the spacecraft, and we've got to make it so that they don't have any issues once they're on the moon or Mars. If you like robots, we've got people that design robots. Before we go to the moon and Mars, we're going to keep sending robots there so that we understand what the terrain and what the astronauts would be landing on. If you like to draw, we've got graphics artists and designers. Most of those videos that you watched are done by graphic artists and designers. In fact, that's what my brother does at Johnson Space Center in Texas. He's a graphic artist for NASA. If you like to cook, we got a lot of questions today about food. Well, somebody had to figure out how to make that astronaut ice cream in the first place. And so we have food scientists that do that sort of thing. So there is all sorts of stuff that we do. And I'm always excited to talk to this, to the public, and especially, I'll tell you a little secret. So any adults out there, plug your ears. But my favorite is talking to kids, because by the time by the time you guys are graduating college, that is when we're going to be going to Mars. And that is exciting. I mean, that is something that mankind has never done before, is leave our little orbit here with the moon and the Earth and go to a completely different planet and learn how to live. I mean, this is like living in the time of Magellan or Christopher Columbus and exploring these new worlds. I mean, it's an exciting time, and SLS is going to be the first vehicle to do that. So, Nagy, with that, open it up to any other questions and anything else you have to say.
Well, that was really awesome. And this is super exciting. Now I can really see why NASA is so hyped up about all this stuff coming up. Can't wait to follow along. Jacoby, who is 5, wanted to know if balloons float in microgravity.
That's a good question. So actually, everything floats in microgravity. So microgravity, it's hard for us to understand because we live here on the Earth. Well, let me see if I can explain what an orbit really is. So when we go into orbit and you see the astronauts floating around, what is really happening there? Okay, so I want you to imagine yourself standing on top of Mount Everest, okay? Tallest mountain in the world, nothing taller than that. And you throw a baseball. A baseball is going to go out a little bit and it's going to go down because gravity is pulling it down. And eventually it's going to hit the Earth. Let's say that you throw the baseball a little bit harder. It's going to go a little bit further out, but it's still going to go down and hit the Earth. All right, let's say that you are Superman. You're the most powerful being ever, and you're able to throw a baseball at 17,500 miles an hour, okay? A lot faster than anybody could ever pitch a baseball, but we'll say that Superman can do it. If he threw the baseball hard enough, it's going to go out, but gravity is still going to pull it down. Well, if he throws it fast enough, gravity is going to pull it down at the same rate that the Earth is curved. And so that ball is going to keep falling towards the Earth, but by the time it is going to hit the Earth isn't there anymore because it is following the curvature, the roundness of the Earth. Eventually, that ball is going to come back and it's going to smack Superman in the back of the head because all it did was keep falling towards the Earth. That is what is happening when we send astronauts into space. We send them up, we send them at 17,500 miles an hour, and really what they're doing the entire time they are in space is they are falling. And they are falling towards the Earth the entire time. But they never hit the Earth because by the time they would have hit the Earth isn't there anymore. They have traveled around the curve of that Earth, and they just keep going around and around and around and around. That's what we call an orbit. So when you asked if a balloon floats in microgravity, everything floats in microgravity because everything is falling. So if you've ever jumped on a trampoline and you've had something in your hand, try this sometime. So jump on a trampoline, and right when you get to the top of your jump, let go of that thing in your hand, and it's gonna look like it's floating to you. That's because right at that moment, when you are at the top of your jump, you are in microgravity, right? Gravity's still pulling on you, but your forces have completely evened out. The force of the jump up and the force of the gravity down have evened out, and you're kind of just hanging there. Well, that's really what the astronauts are doing. They're just hanging there in space. So if they had a balloon inside of their spacecraft, it would float. But guess what? If they had a bowling ball inside of their spacecraft, it would also float. Everything in space floats. It's only when we get close to planets or the moon or Earth or the sun, that's when the gravity takes hold and pulls things down. So hopefully that answers your question.
That was great. Well, Dave, I do want to respect your time, and I know we've been going for about an hour now. So thank you again so much for chatting with us. This is super exciting. I hope everything goes well with the launch next week, and as you guys get ready for Artemis 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, we're real excited. And then again, I hope everybody, if you get an opportunity to tune in and watch that test firing, they're usually pretty exciting. I mean, if with the world the way that it is right now, with everybody being cooped up inside, we could all use a little bit of excitement. So 3 o'clock next Wednesday, log into NASA TV and give it a look.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, and maybe we'll talk soon later.
Okay. Anytime. Thank you, everybody.